20 years in the NHL, 1,138 regular season games, 14 Stanley Cup Playoff Games, the 2007 NHL All Star Game, and the 2025 Spengler Cup. Now you're working in hockey operations for the OUA. Greg Kimmerly, appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Seth. I appreciate you inviting me, and I think this is a great initiative that you started to create a community for officials to share ideas, and there's always power in community. So good for you.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We've had a lot of interest from all across the globe. Who knew hockey? Who knew hockey can connect people from all these different countries and especially officials? So it's been a lot of fun. I'm really excited to chat with you. Not only do I work with you on the OUA side when I'm still skating once a week now, but you've got a huge amount of experience when it comes to officiating with your career. So very much looking forward to this day. I guess, first of all, a big question everybody has is, well, how did you actually get into officiating in the first place? Because everybody has a different story for how they put on the strikes.
Well, I guess mine is a fairly common theme for most officials is that I was a frustrated hockey player. I knew that my playing skills weren't going to take me very far, and I wanted to find another way to stay involved in the game. And it was during my high school years. I was playing for a club team here in Toronto, and I was also playing for a high school team. So I was playing, 3-4 games a week plus practices. And my dad did say to me, he said, you know what, you do need to find a way to earn some money. So you need to look into something. I considered retail. I considered working in the hospitality industry and just realized, at that age, 16, 17, I didn't have the time with my hockey schedule. So I realized that 7 a.m. on Saturday mornings at Weston Arena was the best place to start. So that's where I started with Weston House League, doing, the U6 or the Tykes or whatever you want to call them, doing that hockey 7 a.m. till 10 a.m. Every Saturday. And that's how I started. There was another guy that I was playing with. He was on both teams with me. So we were in a similar situation. He started with me, and about 4 weeks in, he quit. And I asked him, I said, why are you quitting? He said, I can't handle all these people yelling and screaming at me. And I turned to him and I said, who's yelling and screaming at us? And it was very early at that point that I realized that I wasn't hearing the noise that was going on, but it was really bothersome to him. And I think, everyone in this community can relate that officials are a special breed. We're a unique breed. But that to me was an early sign that the noise from the crowd, the U6 or the U7 coach that was upset at an icing or an offside that I called wasn't really bothering me. And I did dig in, wholeheartedly into understanding the game from a different perspective. Also embracing the various policies and procedures that are involved with officiating, and I just got a passion for it. And from then, went from house league and worked my way up through the various ranks.
I always say it's the best part-time job you'll ever have. Yeah, it beats working at McDonald's. Um, Now, at what point did you start becoming aware of officiating at the junior level? Because I know with me, I had no idea how somebody even got to officiate junior hockey. So I was flying blind. How about you? Like, did you have an idea or?
So I took to it very, very quickly. So I was about 16 when I started with Weston House League. And when I was 18, I went to a camp, would have been one of the first that the OHA ran. It was out in Conestoga, at Conestoga College. And it was a development camp, but it was also a recruitment camp to a certain extent for the OHA. And from that, I had worked hard on my skating. I'd worked hard on my positioning. So I went to that camp at Conestoga, and about a month after that, there was a tryout up in Barrie for the OHA. And so I went to that, and a couple of people noticed, some of my skills. And, from there, I started working junior hockey with the OHA. It was all new to me. I had played high school hockey. I hadn't played in the OHA, hadn't played at the junior B or junior C ranks. So that whole cultural environment was different to me. Like you, I wasn't aware of how much hockey was really out there in the province. But I would say that Part of what got people's attention was that I was willing to go anywhere, any night. And, there was a period of time that I was working, I'd worked, 2 shifts on a Saturday, 2 shifts on a Sunday, and then every night of the week. And that exposure just got me out to various rinks. I was fortunate enough to get a lot of mentorship from a number of key people in the OHA. At that time, the referees would be able to pick their linesmen in the playoffs. So I was quite fortunate with that. A man named Ralph Sparks took me under his wing, and that was eye-opening to go to all parts of Ontario throughout my OHA career as a linesman, or a linesperson, I guess. Going to the small towns in May for provincial championships, and the arenas packed, people waiting outside. It was just a fun time in my life, and a great experience.
Yeah, was Charlie Lennox running everything?
Yeah.
Actually, at that time, Will Norris was the assigner.
Norris. Okay.
Yeah. You mentioned referees choosing their linesman, so it was still the same whenever I got started. And if you had a good referee who was going all the way and he liked you, you could have a pretty good run yourself.
Yeah, and it gave you the initiative and the drive throughout the course of the season to work hard for every referee, because you never knew who was going to get chosen for playoff games, and you always wanted to show your strong side to everyone.
Yeah, for sure. And so for you, when did you make the jump to refereeing? Is that something you knew you wanted to do, or did you line for a couple years?
I lined to the point where I tried out for the OHL as a lines person for the OHL, and it became very apparent that they didn't feel that I had the skills as a lines person to excel. I definitely know that there was one year I went and did a couple of exhibition games, and the reports weren't great after the game. At that time, I was doing, Senior A championships, provincial championships, Junior A provincial championships, Junior B provincial championships, like doing all of them, going right till the end of May with Ralph. And so working a lot of high pressure games. But there was just something about my skill set that the OHL didn't like as a lines person. And so I approached Will Norris, who was the director of officiating for the OHA at the time and the assigner. And I asked him about transitioning to being a referee. And he did say to me, he said, the hard part will be is that your season will be much shorter, Greg. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, and back then, regular seasons finished in February. The junior C, loop finished in February, and the playoffs started then. He said, you will no longer be working deep into the playoffs. And so I took that. And so there were a couple of years where I finished much earlier, but I transitioned to the role of being a referee. And I had always maintained my connection with minor hockey. Back then it was the MTHL. But my 10 years in the OHA, 8 of those years I was working 2 nights a week for the GTHL. And I was fortunate enough to get some exposure in the GTHL, refereeing, the U16 hockey, the U15 hockey. So that gave me the opportunity to work at both. So then when I had the chance to referee at the junior level, I'd honed those skills a little bit with minor hockey, and then took it from there.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, because this is a question that comes up all the time in the car, on the way to games and on the way back. If I'm working with the Denver official, they'll ask me, okay, Seth, I really want to referee. I've been lining for a year or two. Do I try and make a run lining and hop over, or switch to refereeing sooner? For me, I usually tell them that, I would try and make this switch over as soon as possible if your lining, career has a ceiling. I'm not sure if you have a different opinion or how you would approach that.
I think it's always great to try to dabble in both, and hone your skills in minor hockey as a lines person, then move up to the junior hockey as a lines person, maintaining your connections with minor hockey, and then taking advantage of the opportunities that they give you to wear the bands, which are far and few, at times, because there's also hierarchy there, and there's veteran officials that have been doing it for a while, and that's where it comes into, the more you make yourself available, excuse me, the more opportunities you're going to get. I found tournaments were a great opportunity. They were great for exposure. They were also just based on the volume of games. Quite often a signer would, if you approach them and said, you know what, I want to look into refereeing, if you find a tournament that, even it starts early on in the season where they have different levels of hockey, you could be potentially lining U15 hockey, but then refereeing the U12 hockey. So, making yourself available, and to me the key was learning those skills at the lower levels.
Yeah, for sure. And so, you get into the OHL. Was pro hockey on the radar at that point? Because like, once you're in the OHL, all the young guys have an aspiration of moving on. But what was it like for you, and what was that process?
So pro hockey was an aspiration. Pro hockey was I was 18 when I went to that camp in Conestoga with the OHA, and pro hockey even at that point was an interest of mine. It was something that I could see potentially happening. There were some people that were pursuing that at the time, so it was of interest to me. So it was always sort of the light at the end of the tunnel, always sort of the target that I was aiming for. I got invited to a couple of NHL combines, so had exposure there. That helped me to get into the OHL. The interest that the NHL was showing in me. I was fortunate enough to be part of a new program that the NHL was starting back in 1990, where they hired what they called trainees. So you were never a full-time employee, but you were contracted and you were paid on a per game basis. And the NHL had set up agreements with a number of leagues, from the 3 major junior leagues to there was a league at the time called the International Hockey League, which was a pro league, the East Coast League at the time, which was strictly on the East Coast. So the NHL would get a percentage of the assignments for those, and they would send the 17 of us. We were all referees, and they would send the 17 of us out to those games. So for a period of 3 years, my weekends were basically traveling for hockey, and a lot of it was driving. So it would be a combination of assignments from the OHL, the OHA, and also what the NHL was sending me.
Yeah, well, and I think this goes back to what you were saying about having an open availability calendar. No, in the trainee program, you worked a lot of hockey, so you were getting a lot of reps, and I think that's the secret sauce. Because if you're only working 30 games a season, you're not really getting too many at bats.
And you're not exposed to all the different situations that can occur. And at the different levels, you would see different things happen. And most interesting, it was often at the lower levels that you would learn the most, because the most unexpected things would happen, and you'd have to dig in deep into the rule book to assess one of those obscure rules that you never come across. But yeah, it was difficult to keep on top of all the rule changes. But at the same time, the exposure to the different levels and different personalities really taught me a lot that served me throughout my entire career.
Yeah, and so you worked in the era where the 3-man system was the system. You were by yourself every single night. I miss it. I love working the 3-man system. If you can skate, you just can have a great time. I'm very curious to know um, your opinions on how the how the system changes have affected the output on the ice, from back in your days in the 90s to now where it's 4-man. Do you find there's pros and cons to both? Do you miss the 3-man? Like,
There, there was certainly the thrill of that was your game, and you were in charge, you were in control. There was also the aspect that it was very frightening at times when the roof was caving in and everything was all on your shoulders. That at times could really rattle you. But there's definitely something to be said for it. This is my game, and this is how I'm going to run it. I would say that even in the 4 official system, you should try to maintain that. It's very important that you set your standard and you stick to it, and you try to employ that from game to game. The biggest challenge with the 4 official system is earning and having the trust of your partner. And communication within the team is so essential now. The game has changed to where everyone expected 10 infractions to be missed, and the official would just call the key 3 or 4 infractions, and then the game would just go up and down. And that was my era of refereeing in the 3 official system. But now in the 4 official system, and with the advent of video, social media, people able to capture plays on their phones and then share them on social media, the perception now is that the game needs to be called perfectly all the time. And of course, the perfect game has never happened. So there's more pressure now with more eyes on the ice. But to me, the biggest change is letting go of that control and working hard to earn the trust of your partner, and also working with them so that you come to trust them. So trust is the biggest factor, and still owning it as your game, but understanding that your partner also has their own standard in their zone. And it's not as much of a balancing act now as it was when it first came in, where it was egos fighting against each other to maintain control of the game. Now it is more of a symphony, operating in unison, which is great to see. But certainly trust is the key factor.
Yeah, I was working the OHL when the 4-man was rolled out there, and it was, me being the young guy, and then you had some experienced, grizzled veteran who had been calling it on his own for such a long time, and then don't you dare call it how he
Exactly.
it was still a bit learning process.
Yeah.
The interesting thing though is, all of my younger development years were in the 3 official system. So I still have the feeling where if you're looking for referee development, you're on the spot, so you're forced to perform and you can't really hide. What I find now is, supervising or working with some younger referees on the ice, they can almost hide behind a more experienced official because they're not forced to deal with the coach, or they're not forced to be the center of attention because you have 2 people on the ice. How do you think we can get around that? Because now 4-man starting so early, but the referees aren't being forced on into that spotlight where they are almost like they're forced to develop faster than they would in the 4-man. I'm not sure if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, no, that completely makes sense. And certainly with any of the work that I do with OUA officials, I do try to quietly work with the veteran officials to challenge them to step back and to realize that, this is a moment for a young official to step up, to, show their mettle, to confront an angry coach, to go over to the coach, even though the coach is saying, no, I want to talk to the veteran official. You've got to allow those junior officials to go and communicate with the coaches face to face. You've got to allow them to make a few mistakes so that they can learn from them. As a veteran official, you've got to also understand the nuances to giving feedback. Certainly between periods is somewhat touchy at times, but at the same time doing a thorough debrief after the game, and doing it in a way where the whole team can learn and move forward, versus puffing your chest out and saying, this is what I did, 10 years ago when I did the national championships and things along those lines. Because the difficult part is that the coaches and the players, they can sense who is the veteran official and who is the junior official, and they all gravitate to the veteran official. And it's a real challenge for that veteran official to, put their ego to the side, and to move forward to develop the less experienced official. But by the same token, the less experienced officials have to recognize opportunities where they've got to take charge and they've got to jump in. And my time in the NHL, when that transition was happening, one of the best pieces of advice that an officiating manager gave to me was, you need to do, in this situation, something happened on the ice, and he said, you need to do something. And whatever it is, do with whatever is within your personality, because your personality might be different than your partner's. So don't try to be like them. So be yourself, but you have to do something. And, he said, just standing there, not doing anything, not reacting in any way, does not send a strong message, and people pick up on that. So as a junior official, you have to do something, even if it's just quietly going over to one of the players on the team that's unraveling, but you need to do something. And so, and doing those small little actions of communication or stepping in will build your confidence to do it further. So it's, I use that word trust again. It's coming back to where the veteran official needs to know when to step back, and the junior official needs to know I've got to always be putting myself out there, stepping up, even in small little increments.
That's great advice. And actually, this is a good segue because you worked at the highest level for 20 years. Longevity is, especially working at that level, some guys come and go. You stuck around for quite a while. What would you say was your secret sauce for having that length of career at the NHL?
Um, I guess the fortitude and the determination to always fight through the ups and the downs. Throughout the course of the season, throughout the course of a career, you have lots of highs and you have lots of lows. And the key thing was trying to maintain that even keel. I guess the other thing is that, unless you're working Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, there's still something that you can do better. So each summer I would take time to try to, in certain ways reinvent myself. There were times that I, would focus on maybe the mental aspect of the game, do some reading or even some work with some mental professionals in terms of your communication skills. There would also be, certainly in the summertime, would work hard on my fitness. I always took pride in showing up at camp in top form. As I got older, I realized the importance of trying to maintain that fitness. Certainly early on in my career, it was all about how did I do on the fitness test, and then I'd kind of let it slip throughout the course of the season. I think, though, back in the early 90s, that was the same with the players, that it was, work out in the summer and then that was it. But now it's 12 months of the year, 7 days a week. You look at players, they live a different life now than NHL players in the early 90s. So fitness was a key. I worked on my skating. Skating was never a strong suit of mine. So it was something that I worked on, even to the point later in my career, hiring a skating coach. So there were always things that you needed to do to make yourself better every year. And also to a certain extent to sort of reinvent yourself. You would always go on the ice with, everyone would have preconceived notions from past experiences with you. So if any of those were negative, you would do your best to try to, play them down, try to change them, try to diminish the impact that they were having on your game. So for me, the key was working hard off the ice, reinventing yourself, and also finding, unique ways to train yourself.
Yeah. Well, you brought up the mental side, and what I tell the guys is officiating is 90% in your head.
Yes.
It's there's no way around it. And the term we use a lot is mind fuck. Like you can mind fuck yourself. And so how did you approach that? Because I struggled with that when I first started at the junior and minor pro level. How did you approach the mental aspect and limiting the highs and the lows and staying more even keel?
So one of the key ways of doing it is creating for yourself a circle of trust. So some people in the community, some people in the organization that you work with that you can rely on, that you can trust. Because everyone has bad games and everyone leaves the rink knowing that, yeah, you know what, I missed that hit, and that's where the game changed completely. And you can beat yourself up. When you start to share stories and share vulnerability and authenticity with the right people, you come to realize that everyone's going through the same thing. And so then when it happens to you on the ice, you just have to realize, okay, I have to regroup, no differently than the guy that did the game last night. They have to regroup as well. So you come to realize by sharing stories, and that's why, having this community is such a great idea of yours, where you come to realize that as much as we compete against each other, we're the only people that we have for each other that can support us. So it's such a fine line. That was always the challenge in the National Hockey League, and that, we're all competing for playoff spots. So we don't really want to cheer for our colleagues, but at the same time, you have to cheer for your colleagues because nobody else is cheering for you. So it's a very tight knit community where there's a lot of support for each other, but at the same time you're competing against each other. So it is a fine line. So I would say that the key way to deal with the highs and the lows is to share your experiences with the right people.
Yeah. And actually, there's a bunch of leagues now where they have, a mental health professional, a sports psychiatrist on staff to work with the officials, which I think
Yes.
is amazing. Yeah,
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah.
That I was speaking of, game preparation and all that stuff. Travel is one of the hardest, at least for me. I found the travel side to be one of the most challenging things to deal with. What was your game day routine like, and how did you handle the excessive travel at times?
Well, travel is what wears you down in the NHL, in the National Hockey League. Certainly after 9/11, airline travel became much more difficult. Lineups, having to get there early. So if you had a road trip with, you were gone for 10 days and you were working 7 nights out of that, your days in between were filled with lineups and waiting. So you do need to take time to recharge. I used to try to leave early in the morning so that I could get to the next city as soon as possible, so that if that was an off day, you could get settled. You could take some time to casually, get down to the gym, maybe take some time to rest and relax, then go out for a good dinner, and then call it a night. Other people would like to go later in the day. I always found that just ate into my day. I wanted to get to the next place as soon as possible. Certainly in my time in the OHL, when you talk about a circle of trust, it was on some of those long drives that you built some of the strongest friendships, and you also continued to build that bond with your teammates. And then when it hit the fan, you knew that you could rely on the people that you were working with, because you got to know them. You spent time talking about their families, what they did for a day job, what stresses they have at their day jobs, things like that. So I always tried to make the most of those opportunities, when you're traveling in a car. I guess, yeah, the hardest part about travel is understanding that it takes a lot out of you. So you do have to take the time to rest. It's easy to say that, well, I didn't do anything for 4 hours. I sat in the car and came back. Yeah, but maybe the next day, maybe you have to do a little bit more to recharge yourself, because it is very draining. Yeah.
Yeah, especially on the long drives,
Yes.
as like your brain's still going.
Yeah.
And go up cook, yeah. So, tell me, you actually spent some time in the UK, I think, working with the EIHL. How does that?
So in 2016, when I left the ice in the NHL, I went over to Europe and I ran an officiating program out of Austria for 4 years. And through part of that time, what I did is I did some consulting with the UK. So I helped out the UK mostly virtually. I went to a couple of their seminars. In September of 2016, my wife and I moved over to Austria, just outside of Salzburg, and I ran an officiating program for about 150, 200 officials across two pro leagues. One was a full pro league. The secondary league was a semi-pro league. So there were some players that were local that weren't paid. But that was a great experience. The league covered across five European countries, so we got to travel a lot. I got to spend time in a different culture. I got to work with officials that had been sort of trained and honed differently. That was a bit of a transition for the IIHF, where they were moving closer to the NHL model in terms of officiating. Prior to that, the IIHF was very regimented and very opposed to sort of the showy side of the NHL. So I did a lot of work with the officials there in terms of working on communication, when to approach a coach, what words to use, things along those lines. So that was a great experience. And I would say anyone later in their career, I would take the opportunity to supervise and mentor fellow officials from the stands. I learned so much in that first year as an administrator that I wish I had understood 20 years earlier when I was on the ice, because it's amazing when you remove yourself from it and you're watching from above how things develop and evolve, and being able to identify those moments when you should step into a game became very much clearer to me from above. and without the pressure of doing it. But I would say to someone who's, sort of established themselves 4 or 5 years into a league to take some time to circle back and possibly mentor or supervise other officials, because you'll learn a lot about yourself by watching others.
Yeah, actually, I was saying, I tell guys the game's officiated from the stands, it's not officiated on the ice.
Yeah.
And I think when you change that perspective, it helps you appreciate the bigger picture that you don't get when you're skating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you went from, working in Austria and, now you're working with youth sports. And a lot of people, when I was first started in the OHA, I had no idea what university hockey was. Obviously, everybody knows about college hockey in the States. So tell us about the youth sports hockey program and, what it can do with for officials, because it is good hockey.
So it's excellent hockey. It's intense. They only play 28 games. They're heavily recruited for the Canadian schools. Youth sports as a whole, I think the Maritimes has sort of been a landing ground for a lot of ex-CHL players to head out to the Maritimes. Here in Ontario, they've done a much better job at recruiting players. We've represented ourselves very well at the most recent national championships. For officials, it's a great opportunity because now you're refereeing or you're officiating men, and it's such a big difference from dealing with a junior hockey player. They understand the small nuances of the game. For lines people, the face-offs are very, very challenging. Each and every one of the centermen, most of the players have played at the CHL level, so major junior hockey. And there will be some that will go on to minor pro hockey, whether it's the East Coast League or over in Europe. I would say a percentage, maybe 10% of the players move on, but a lot of them, they're playing from, they're 21 to 25 and they're playing out their hockey careers. It's a bit of an odd dynamic because unfortunately they don't draw a lot of fans. And there can be moments where it feels like it's a beer league game where they're going up and down because there's, friends and families in the arena and it's cold. It's, Friday night in January, it's cold, it's snowing outside, nobody's in the rink, they're going up and down. And then all of a sudden there'll be one play or one big hit and the game can change on a dime. And they ramp it up and they can very easily go from 0 to 90. So it is a game of concentration for the officials. You have to keep yourself really, really focused because they'll either go up and down or all of a sudden it can sort of go sideways. It's fast, it's intense. They hit to hurt. We've worked hard on keeping the stick work down because they see the ice so well and they've all played for such a long period of time at a high level. They're extremely skilled. So it's excellent hockey. It's a great league for officials to really hone their skills. What we've tried to do over the last few years is try to introduce a few newer officials into the league early on in the season. And then sort of after Christmas, we pare down. It goes fast. They take a break at December for the Christmas break or the holiday break. And then they come back in January. So 28 games, they probably play 18 to 19 of their games before the holiday break. And then it's a sprint and they're done by the middle of March. And playoffs are 2 out of 3. And that, the playoffs go all within that week. So you go, Wednesday, Thursday, Sunday, and they're done. So it's intense, it's fast, but it's a real challenge because, as I said, you're now dealing with adults. You're not dealing with junior hockey players, and the coaches have been around for a long, long time. So they know hockey, they love hockey, they live hockey. The technology isn't the greatest. The video they have isn't the same as what's at the OHL level, but they're working on that. But certainly there's a focus on high performance and elite athletics in the OUA hockey.
Yeah, I wish they would do dollar beer nights and they get a massive crowd every night.
Exactly. Each school has tried a variety of things, but in Quebec, they draw very, very well. But for some reason here in Ontario, there's just so many things competing for the entertainment dollar that it's basically family and friends.
Yeah. For sure. And this is going back maybe 18, 20 years, when I started in the OHL. Conrad Hashe was trying to put together a type of trainee program where you would work, the three major junior leagues plus the OUA, because the hockey is really good. Do you see something like that? Because we have a good product with the OUA hockey, and it's a great training ground for promising officials. Do you have any thoughts on how we can better leverage that type of hockey to send guys up?
We've done it a bit over the last few years. A couple of years ago, the OHF ran a development camp that revolved around OUA games and OHL games. Last year in January, Hockey Canada brought officials in from across the country and used OUA games. So 3 games a night on a Friday and a Saturday, and then also ran a clinic. So there is recognition that it is great hockey to develop officiating skills. Mostly due to the challenges of how you need to be able to read the temperature of the game and read the emotions of the participants. So that's where it's great. I know that Conrad doesn't like to evaluate people at a different level to see how they would translate into the OHL. He'd rather evaluate them at the OHL level. So there is some hesitation there, but we're hoping to continue to build that partnership where there's more exchanges between officials and an opportunity for a young official to show their mettle in an OUA game that hopefully give them an opportunity to work an OHL game.
Yeah. And so let's say, because we have a lot of officials in junior hockey now. Let's say somebody wants to get into the U Sports OUA level. What's the process? What are you looking for? How do they show their interest?
So show their interest by contacting me. That would be a first step. What I do is with the current structure in the OHA is rely on recommendations from the senior officiating managers, so from the SOMs, and I take their recommendations and work with Chris Ferreira, the assigner, to make sure that we have the right people working OUA hockey, and then the number one thing would be to, when you're working that hockey, or even if you're working hockey at a lower level, is to show your strengths in hockey IQ, your understanding of the game, your understanding of momentum changes, momentum shifts, understandings of emotions of the game. And then going back to that point that I made, that was given to me in the NHL level, was that, and when something happens, do something and show people that you're doing something. And, for a lines person to get to that hot spot, to follow that hot player that's going off on a line change and sticking near to them without grabbing them and throwing them around, but just making your presence, being in the right spot at the right time. That shows a senior officiating manager that this individual understands the game. They understand the emotions within the game. They understand the hot spots. They're there to control the emotions. So showing your hockey IQ, I think, is the biggest thing. And another thing that was told to me at a young age was that work hard every night because you never know who's going to be in the building. And that is so true. I know it's hard if you're working, 6-7 nights a week to bring it every night. But if you're not able to do that, then maybe scale back to 3 or 4 nights a week, because you have to bring it every night, because perception is such a huge thing in this industry or in this business. And once you get labeled with something, it's very difficult to get knocked off that label. So you want to be labeled with something that's positive. You want to be labeled with, that person always shows up. Every time I'm in a rink, that person's always hustling. That person's always right in the right spot at the right time. And you can very easily do that as a lines person. People think it's hard to make yourself stand out as a lines person, but it jumps out at you in the stands when a lines person has high hockey IQ, easy for me to say, and you can really sense that person that understands the game and understands the big moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question. If you could make one rule change today, what rule would you either change, remove, add?
Wow, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
Um, One rule change that I would like to make. Um, I guess it would revolve it would revolve around scrum management and gatherings, and I guess it is within our toolbox, but I think a more severe penalty and make it become more of the norm with a 4-minute penalty or a double minor for scrum action, just to really send the message. It is something that becomes an issue at the OUA level, because if they fight, they automatically get suspended they get kicked out of that game and suspended for the next game. So what tends to happen is there's a lot of grabbing on, holding on, wrestling, scrums that go far too long. So I always try to implore to the officials to really, grab those early in the game, set the tone. And I just think if it became more the norm that you could come out of a scrum with a 4-minute penalty to kill, it would tighten it up a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I always get so many different answers to that question. So
That's a good question.
Yeah, yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, great. Appreciate you taking the time. This has been great. You've shared a lot of tips in your own experience, so I'm sure the guys are going to love this.
Excellent. Well, I applaud you for doing this. We all need community to connect with, and certainly as officials.